There has been a lot of controversy around a female television star who's in her late 30s slash early 40s, I believe, getting pregnant with a male basketball athlete who is 21 slash 22. And while I don't want to talk about those folks in particular, um, I do want to use that relationship as context. Um, I work in the mental health slash legal field, and especially in the legal field, there's some controversy around brain development. Specifically, brain development. Your brain does not stop developing until you are in your mid to late 20s. Women, their stops earlier than men. So, most likely, most men don't stop development until the latter part of their 20s, specifically the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe of your brain is responsible for making making, uh, you know, responsible, well thought out, logical reasoning. And so, why it's so highly controversial in the legal field is because, you know, there are children and teenagers who often commit crimes, sometimes felonies, and, the controversy becomes like, well, are they really responsible for the crimes they commit because they're highly likely to be impulsive or make decisions that are impulsive or irrational up until their brain stops fully developing. And then so there's that one aspect, and then the other aspect in which I work with in my therapy practice, the victims of abuse, particularly victims who grow up in abusive families. While you're growing up, from a developmental perspective, your brain is groomed for a significant amount of time, 20 plus years, as a matter of fact, to normalize or to withstand abusive environments. So, whereas, what tends to often happen is there's people, when you go out in the real world and you grow up in an abusive family, that's when you start to realize, when you're in your 20s or whatnot, that this isn't normal. What happened in my family isn't normal. When you have other people that react to it, or you see other experiences of how people live or what they're accustomed to, when you go to college or when you start immersing yourself in other real world type situations, that's when you see that, maybe, what I grew up with or what was normalized is not, that's not really healthy behavior. But your brain has developed to normalize that. And so certain things where if you're on the outside looking in, like the outside world may say, hey, that's abusive or that's predatory, because it's so much easier to see when you're on the outside looking in, when you're coming at it from a developmental level where you've been exposed to things or you've been groomed. um, it doesn't strike you as being anything odd. And so I work a lot with people learning how to retrain their brain, to normalize that, hey, abusive or predatory situations are not, that's not okay. And we have to look at different ways of looking at things, or, situations where even in an intimate partnership, someone can have power over you where you may have normalized that for a certain amount of time. And it's totally possible that when the brain stops developing, that you could sort of rewire your brain to look at other situations as healthy, but it's oftentimes so much more difficult. It's like climbing up a mountain with a boulder on your back. But all that to say is, when someone like, for example, this young man becomes of age, he may or may not, his brain, when it fully matures, it may not be thinking in the same way that it is now with being with a much older woman at such a young age. Think of how many decisions you've made in your 20s or, maybe in your early teens. And I'm quite sure the bulk of us would raise our hands and say we would no longer make those same impulsive decisions. We probably wouldn't even be in love with the same people, or we might have chosen different people to surround ourselves with. So, just some food for thought.